Okay, so we are doing tonight Parshas Terumah um, with our friend for the year, Don Isaac Abravanel. And of course, Parshas Terumah is not just dominated by, but it really consists in its entirety of the prescriptions for the Mishkan, for the form of divine sanctuary, for the dwelling place of the divine spirit during the sojourn of the Jewish people in the wilderness. Um, Abravanel does not go into the question of, well, let's say he does not agree with Rashi, who maintains that Parshas Terumah really only describes or is a response to the events narrated later on in the Torah of the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, and that which follows. That is the view of Rashi. Abravanel clearly does not follow that view. He's very reluctant to distort the sequence of events the way they appear in the Torah. He's not quick to embrace Rashi's rabbinic formula, Ein Mukdamu Mu'achar Torah. There's no chronology in the Torah. He agrees with Ramban, who is very reluctant to take that approach. But that is just sort of by way of context. Abravanel maintains that this information was transmitted to Moshe on Har Sinai, and Moshe is told, tell the children of Israel, etc. Of course, Moshe did not actually convey all of this information until the time was right. But this is all part of the original divine plan, and the Mishkan and its appurtenances, the Ark of the Covenant, the Keruvim, the cherubs, the images that were angelic. We'll talk about them shortly, more extensively. The menorah, the golden menorah, the shulchan, the table upon which the showbread was arrayed, the altar that was intended for sacrifices, the further altar, the inner altar, which was for ketoras, for incense. All of this was part of the original divine plan, according to Abravanel. And of course, it has profound meaning and significance. He even goes on to say towards the end that the message and the meaning and the wisdom and the insight that we derive from studying this passage and understanding it, as we'll try to do a bit tonight as well, is not at all dependent, or let's say it's not diminished by the fact that actually we don't have access to the avoda that is described, because the message and the meaning and the lesson to be derived is still current and is still relevant and is still part, an essential component of the wisdom of the Torah. So with that in mind, let's see how Abravanel approaches some aspects of this Mishkan, and as I said, its many features. So he starts off by saying, or by reviewing in some detail, and I have to say in a sophistication that actually goes beyond my understanding of the astronomy, although I don't know that much about astronomy, but medieval astronomy is a discipline in its own right, in the sense that the medievals had a certain understanding of astronomy, which in some ways is more than I have, but in other ways probably has some imprecisions associated with it. So he starts off by quoting the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim. By the way, just for those who want to find the right place in the Chumash, it's on page 444 in Parshas Terumah. Actually, we're not really going to be looking verse by verse. Will be important to have a general understanding of the features of the Mishkan in order to follow the insights that Abravanel shares with us. So he says the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, also Ibn Ezra goes down this path in great detail with a lot of astronomical, insight and sophistication. Also Ralbag, who again was a very loyal, a very almost uh, totally devoted Aristotelian, meaning that his view of the world was greatly influenced by Aristotle, even more so than the Rambam. He criticizes the Rambam for taking issue with Aristotle, and Ralbag himself is completely enthralled to the Greek philosopher. Abravanel is not enthralled to Aristotle. He does quote Aristotle. He occasionally will endorse his view, or will mention that Aristotle also agrees with what I'm saying. But he critiques Aristotle, and we'll see that actually in a very short while as we continue tonight. So I'm not going to go into the attempt on the part of the, let's say, Jewish philosophers and the Mefarshim, the great Mefarshim, who were also proficient in astronomy or astrology even, and who therefore naturally saw the Mishkan as a microcosm of the cosmos, a microcosm of the world itself, and not only planet Earth, but the celestial world also, in which he says that they find all of the Rambam and those who came after him, who followed Ibn Ezra came before the Rambam actually, that we have a remez to the sun, to the planets, to the stars collectively, of course, to the constellations. He refers to Olam Hagalgalim, the world of the spheres, which is part of that Talmudic notion, which again is reflected in the philosophical, ancient philosophical tradition about different like spheres, different layers, and different like heavens in which different like sections or different layers were characterized by different celestial creatures, not just like malachim as we may imagine them, which it's anyway, of course, only a metaphor. Even Hashem himself is not more in heaven than he is on earth, but it's a way of, it's a figure of speech. But again, for the ancients, there was a close connection and a very like much overlapping perception of the world of the spirit and the world of the higher realms in terms of astronomy, the so-called Schalim Hanivdalim, the separate intelligences. And I don't want to dwell on that. I just want to make the following arch observation that Abarbanel extends after devoting quite a lot of time in a respectful way, but one can sense that his heart is not completely in it, in explaining, and he also has a few pages of his own explaining again the astronomical point of view. Then he says there's a weakness in all of this. Abravanel says that שלא היה הרמז והמשל במשכן האלוהים וכליו לדבר חכמוס והדבר המושג מתוך החקירה. The meaning of this Mishkan, which is part of the divine wisdom, part of the prescription of the Torah. Of course, it accompanied the Jewish people in their travels in the wilderness ultimately for 40 years, then in the land of Israel for hundreds of years more. It was, in a way, the basis for the Beis Hamikdash, which stood for 410 years. Bayis Sheni stood for 220 years. We're talking here, although it's been a long, long time ago, but for many, many hundreds of years, in the halcyon days of the Jewish people, in the glory days, in the days of the sovereign kingdom of Shlomo HaMelech, the Beis Hamikdash was an important, not just important, was a central feature in the lives of the Jewish people. Says Abravanel, I'm not comfortable in accepting that it was all just a microcosm of the universe. It was all just a way of like echoing. It doesn't say all just. It says that the meaning must go beyond just the natural. And he says that these are things which can be grasped through study, through research, through, he doesn't say experimentation, but through speculation. V'ha'iyun, ki lo yatzarich yizbarach, the Almighty would not find it necessary lasos remez v'hara Hamashalit beveis mikdasho bekodesh hakadashim uveichal, the holy of holies and the sanctuary and all the different features, just in order to mimic or to evoke an understanding of astronomy. Besides which, he says, and this is the comment which I said a moment ago is arch, meaning it's a sharp comment, a sharp observation. He says science is an evolving body of wisdom. And he says explicitly earlier that in the days of Aristotle, they didn't know this or they didn't see it this way, but now we have a better understanding. The advances in science have progressed beyond the status of Aristotle. Aristotle lived a long, long time before, but for many, many centuries, most intellectuals in the world, certainly in the Western world, were essentially followers of Aristotle. It was only in the 14th, even the 15th centuries when Aristotle began to lose a lot of his sheen. And that's because of a certain reason. We don't need to go into that now. But Abarbanel was part of that trend to critique Aristotle, not only in Jewish or spiritual or halachic or Torah terms, but even in scientific terms, even in philosophical terms as well. And he says that he says, "V'ulai sheyesh bo kifi machshavosem habesh shav v'devar chazav." Maybe the view of the scientists, what we would call scientists today, include thoughts and ideas and even principles which are erroneous. V'kama tauyos v'shibushim. How many errors and folly nichlalu b'chakiroseim b'dvarim ha'elyonim ha'ile me'agalgalim v'schalim ha'nivdalim. And he says that someone who seeks to interpret the Torah, or maybe we might even say to, not that that's the case here, but to reconcile the Torah with modern science, modern 15th century science, he says he's like a person who is leaning on a kanei ratzutz, on a brittle a brittle cane, a brittle like bamboo or something like that. A cane slips my mind what a cane is. Anyway, something which it has not cannot support him. It will break and it will puncture his arm, as the prophet says about relying on Egypt. That's what Abarbanel is borrowing. So therefore, he says all of this effort or all of this approach, this interpretation, because it's not really a matter of reconciliation here, it's just a matter of interpreting the Torah in terms of the science. He says it's all fallible, it's all changing, and it's not reliable. And therefore, he says, I would rather interpret the Torah in a way which is lasting and enduring. He said, I would rather explain that this Olam Katan, this microcosm of the world, is not a microcosm of the natural world, it's a microcosm of the human world. It's a microcosm of a person and the circumstances of humanity, of the human condition. And he says this is the Torani approach. He says he has the Chachma approach and he has the Torani approach. And with that in mind, with that introduction, I know we've lavished quite a lot of time on it, but it's an important and a very, I think, interesting parting of the ways. Again, Abarbanel later on, as he goes through, he says that we've now explained it, whether according to this approach or according to the astronomical approach, we've explained the meaning, we've explained why the proportions are mentioned this way, why this is the particular material. So he doesn't completely dispense with again, what we might call the philosophical or the scientific approach, but he clearly has more sympathy, his heart is more in the Torani approach. So let's consider some aspects of the Mishkan as much as we can do within the time that we have available tonight. So he starts with talking about the Kruvim, because the Kruvim, the cherubs, are in a way the most fascinating, the most intriguing, in a certain sense, the most challenging component of the entire Mishkan, because the Torah forbids a graven image, and yet the Kruvim are instructed the people are instructed to fashion these Kruvim, which are, or could certainly be seen as a graven image. So Abarbanel explains the symbolism of the Kruvim. Now, these Kruvim, I'm sure you know, are a type of angel. We find the word Kruv appears in the prophets in a number of places. It is a type of angel, type of malach, like you have the word saraf and you have the word chashmal. So Kruv is one of those. You have ofanim. So Kruv is one of the names for angels. But the Talmud says the Kruvim are, Kruv is kiravia. Ravia is a child or a young person. Kiravia means like a child. So Abarbanel says that even though we find the word kruv, the chaf in the word kruv is not kiravia as a child, but the chaf is part of the word itself. It's not just a prefix. But nevertheless, he says we find in the Torah that sometimes a word, a letter, the word letter chaf, for example, can be part of the root of the word, and it can be also a prefix. So it's possible that the word kruv is a type of angel, and it is a type of angel that has a human form. We'll speak more about that in a moment. but it has a remez kiravia like a child. How mature is an angel? So angels are not necessarily a particular age. I mean, they're probably ageless, but I'm saying a depiction, even in your mind's eye, of an angel. We often think of them as young, possibly because they are ageless. And a person who's old is not ageless because the years of his life are apparent upon his face, for example. But an angel is ageless, so therefore maybe angels are often depicted as a young person. But Abravanel takes it further, and he uses the expression, he says, they are, Efshar oretz li shayu hakruvim haheim al haaretz kidmus shnei yeladim kitanim, like two young children, asher ein behem kol mum, who have no blemish. They're not wizened by the years. Velo tamu tam chet, and they have never experienced transgression. So Abravanel seems to understand these kruvim as quite young, we might say children of 6 or 8 years. Now, it's interesting because other Mefarshim don't understand the youthfulness of these kruvim quite to that extent. And actually, on Shabbos, Akesh will speak about the mystery of the graven images, because I have another approach from Rabbeinu Bechaya to share on Shabbos. But for now, Bravanel's approach is that these are quite young, meaning not only a young person in the vigor of youth, like we might say a teenager, but rather younger than that. And he says clearly that they have not experienced any transgression. So why are they male and female? So again, other Mefarshim take a different approach, but Abravanel says that male and female because it is an indicator that a Jewish person, whether a man or a woman, should be immersed in the Torah from youth, from childhood. Um, he says that whether a man or a woman, and to me this is quite interesting because Abravanel here seems to endorse or to recognize or to acknowledge the role, not just the role of a woman, but the fact that a woman and a man have equal, like, um, uh, not just equal opportunities, but have an equal experience in immersion in the Torah. He does kind of hint to the fact that a man has a greater obligation in the study of Torah, but he uses a turn of phrase. He says, "Im be." Um, Yasmidu al HaTorah, they should, from childhood, they should be immersed in Torah, im bekriyasa ve'im bekiyu mitzvoseha, whether in the study of Torah or in the fulfillment of the mitzvot. Obviously, those are not mutually exclusive, but I think he probably means to say that a man has a greater Torah obligation to study Torah, but they both share an obligation to keep the Torah. And he says that's why one is male and one is female. And according to that, it's, as I say, a kind of early, historically, chronologically, Abravanel is reflecting an early recognition of the importance of, you could say, Torah growth and Torah commitment and Torah immersion on the part of women and men equally. That's why he says one is male and one is female. He says that that their wings are held aloft. If you want to look at that in the Chumash, you can find that as well. Just point it out because it does say explicitly uh, that if you're with me in the Arso Chumash on page 448, it's chapter 25. It's Pasuk Chaf. Peret Chaf Hey, Pasuk Chaf on page 448. Vayokruvim porseich nafaim lamala. Their wings were spread, you can't see my wings, spread and lifted upwards. Sochichin bechanfehem ala kapores, like shading with their wings. The kaporis is the covering of the ark. Ufnehem ish el achiv, and their faces are to one another. El kaporis yupenakruvim, and they're looking down at the kaporis. The kaporis is the covering. The ark itself, of course, has the luchos habris, the tablets of the covenant. That's why we say the Aron represents Torah, and these kruvim represent the paradigm for a Jewish person, even from early childhood, whose wings are extended upward because that is his ultimate aspiration to ascend spiritually, to be closer to Hashem, again, metaphorically speaking, in the heavens. Their faces are towards one another, and Abravanel says that this alludes to the mitzvahs bein adam lemakom, because their wings represent their yearning, their ascent to the heavenly endeavors, but they face one another because they also acknowledge the entire companion sort of set of mitzvot, which is, as we know, bein adam lachaver, regulating and ennobling their relationship with one another. Um, he says that they are looking downwards, they're looking at one another, facing one another, but their eyes are facing downwards as well, towards the kaporas, where the luchos are contained, representing the Torah itself. So this is how he understands the kruvim, and again he emphasizes the sort of innocence and when I say innocence, the fact that they are free of sin, that's why they're depicted as young people. A more mature person may be righteous, but he's not, to be free of sin is probably something which is, even Moshe Rabbeinu was not free of sin, etc. But the symbolism of the child brings with it that significance. Now, he has an interpretation of the paroches, which I find very beautiful. The paroches, the partition, the curtain separates the space where the Ark of the Covenant is positioned from the rest of the section of the holy section. The Ark, the Aron, is in the Kodesh HaKadashim, the Holy of Holies, but the other side of the partition is the holy section. Obviously, the Holy of Holies is the most sacred, and the Kohen would only enter, even the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would only enter on Yom Kippur only under certain circumstances, as we know. So the paroches is usually understood as a way of demarcating the holy from the Holy of Holies. But Abravanel looks at it in a different point of view. He says that the other kelim, which we're going to explain right now, represent the three areas of reward that a person may merit if he is deserving. He says gufani, which is physical. There is chachma, which is intellectual, and there's hasharas hanefesh, which is immortality of the soul. He says these are associated with the three kelim of the other side of the paroches, the three features. One is the shulchan, the golden table upon which are arrayed the shobred, the lechem hapanim. The other one is the menorah, and the third one is the golden altar, as I said earlier, for the ketoras, for the incense. Says Abravanel that these figures of the angels are intended to represent the aspirations of a Jewish person. Says Abravanel, that's why there is a covering over the to demarcate the holy from the Holy of Holies, because those Keruvim, representing people, should not have their eyes fixated on the reward. They should not, so to speak, have one eye on the benefit, on the kind of profit opportunity, on the desirable or worthwhile, or sort of the motivation to be the best person that he can be, because of the reward that is to come. He says, quotes the famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, don't be as those who serve the master only for the reason of reward. So says Abravanel, we can understand the paroches not just so that the people or the Kohanim will not gaze at the Aron because its holiness sort of means that it has to be kept from public view, but rather the other way around. Again, not to dispute the conventional approach, but he finds a further symbolism. So let me share with you in the time we have left the way that Abravanel interprets those three types of reward. So he says gufani, physical, is osher v'kavod, is reward or success or achievement, profit in this world. That's wealth, that is honor, prestige. He says this is symbolized by the shulchan, which is golden, and of course the bread which is upon it, the 12 breads, it's made of gold. It has a zer. The word zer is like a crown, it's a decorative border around the table. So when you eat at a table, you don't have a border around it because it's difficult to access the food that way. But of course, this table was not to pull up a chair to eat at that table, and therefore the crown was intended as a decoration. But he says also it symbolizes that which is closed off, because he says when it comes to material success, it does not always accrue to the people who we would imagine are most deserving. There can be worthy people who labor in penury, and there can be scoundrels who seem to prosper. So he says that's the mesugar. He says that's the it's like closed off. So he says that border symbolizes the fact that there is some mystery associated with it. But the primary symbolism of it, of the shulchan, is success, material wealth. He says the 12 loaves correspond to the 12 tribes of Israel and to the 12 months of the year. He cannot resist also quoting Josephus that it corresponds to the 12 constellations as well. Even though I said that he, is not that enthused about the associations with the heavens, but he seems to can't resist it. Once you say the 12 tribes and you say the 12 months, so of course the months and the constellations go together. It's not just by accident they're both 12. The constellations represent the cycle of the year, whether the Jewish year or the year itself. So he says the Shulchan represents material success and blessing. Chachma, now it's interesting. The Aron is the Torah wisdom. He says that the menorah represents wisdom in a general sense, all types of wisdom. So he says that this is the wisdom which a person is granted through the study of Torah. A person who studies Torah is able to also appreciate other types of wisdom. And although he doesn't say this, and I'm probably extending it beyond maybe what is completely compelling, but Abravanel was a very worldly individual. I've told you in the past, I'm sure you know already, he was a financier, he was a statesman, he was an investor, he was a businessman, he was a diplomat. Uh, he was very worldly, a brilliant scholar, a brilliant Talmud Chacham of remarkable creativity and originality, but he was very well read. He quotes Augustus, he quotes Aristotle, I've told you, he quotes other philosophers. He doesn't always identify who they are by name. He was a person who was probably as proficient in the worldly knowledge as any of the most educated Europeans of his time and his age. And he hints to the suggestion, again, without saying it outright, that wisdom can be a divine gift for someone who is worthy through the study of Torah. He also explains how the menorah, which of course has a central shaft and has seven lamps altogether, he says it represents the Shiva Chachmos, the seven branches of wisdom, of which the central one is Torah. And he says that the Torah is the one that illuminates the other sources of wisdom as well, the other branches of wisdom. He also hints to an idea, which a very beautiful thought, which I heard from my friend and mentor, Rabbi Michael Twersky. I'm sure it's not original with Rabbi Twersky per se. And Abarbanel kind of alludes to it also. I'm sure many have said it, that the Torah says clearly that the menorah has to be hammered out of a single ingot, a single, it's actually a kikar, was like a talent of gold, and it had to be fashioned in that way. So it symbolizes the idea that the wisdom of the Torah needs to illuminate all the other sources of wisdom, and a person who has interest or expertise or professional knowledge, or maybe just as a hobby, some understanding of another branch of wisdom, it has to be compatible. It has to somehow derive from and be all of a integrated whole with his Torah understanding as well. This is a symbolism of the multiple branches, but they all extend out from the central shaft of the menorah. So he says this represents Chachma. There's diversity and there is illumination. Lastly, our time is nearly up. He says that the Ketores is the most ethereal and the most holy of them all. Actually, the altar of the Ketores is not mentioned in our parsha. It's only mentioned at the end of next week's parsha. He discusses why that is as well. But I don't want to dwell on that aspect, but just to share, to indicate how it fits in with his schema of the three areas of reward that a person who is faithful to the Torah will merit, or can hope to merit, the material blessing, the blessing of wisdom, and the third blessing is immortality of the soul, the world to come. He says this, of course, is symbolized by the incense, which is, as I said, ethereal. It has no substance. I mean, probably a physicist could explain the substance, but the aroma or the appearance of the smoke of the incense is insubstantial. And yet, of course, there is a fragrance to it which nourishes the soul. It ascends straight upward as well. So this represents the soul, the endurance of the soul. And he says that the altar, the golden altar, was not close to the table representing money, and it was not close to the menorah representing what we might call philosophical or scientific knowledge or wisdom generally, because it does not necessarily follow from either of those. A person can be wealthy in this world and impoverished in the next world. A person can be wise in this world, but if he does not live his life in accordance with the principles of the Torah, then he has no grounds to expect great reward in the next world. He says it was opposite the Ara on the other side of the Parochas, but it was opposite the Aram because only a person who studies Torah. He even mentions that neither Aristotle nor his commentators nor his followers have any formula, have any like a method by which they claim that a person can be worthy of his soul living on in the next world. He says this comes only through the Torah. He says that the incense was offered morning and night. Boker represents life. Night represents the next world, the world after the darkness of the night of death. So just to sum up, and he has one last beautiful idea. He says when the Kohen Gadol, it wasn't only the Kohen Gadol, but when a Kohen recites, but he says Kohen Gadol recites the Birchas Kohanim, he says he alludes to these three things. He says, Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, may God bless you and keep you. He says because that is a reference to wealth, because wealth needs shmira, it needs protection, so he won't lose it or it won't be plundered. But he says not only that, he says wealth can corrupt a person. V'yishmerecha, that he says, may Hashem bless you with wealth and also give you the moral fiber to not be corrupted by the wealth. V'yishmerecha, may you be protected from your wealth. So it means both. May Hashem preserve your wealth with you, but preserve you despite your wealth also. That's Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. He says Ya'er is to illuminate, from or. So this refers to the wisdom, the light of wisdom, vichuneka, because wisdom is a blessing of God. Atachonein la'adam nas vichuneka. May Hashem be gracious towards you. May Hashem graciously bestow upon you wisdom. Of course, you've got to do your own endeavors to achieve that as well. And then v'yasem lecha shalom. He blesses the congregation, the Klal Yisrael, that may they have peace. Peace is not only in this world. How long is this world? 70, 80 years, maybe 100 years, maybe 120 years. But V'yasim lecha shalom is the ultimate peace, which is in the next world. The soul should live on in the next world as well. So this is a glimpse of the Torah of Abarbanel in explaining the symbolism of the Mishkan. And I hope you've enjoyed this journey as much as I have, because it has really been fascinating, again, creative, and new insights that we discover together week by week from Don Yitzchak Abarbanel. Thank you very much.